Professor Boyd, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. This morning I'd like to focus on the specific sections of Bill C-15, an act to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. As a point of introduction, I'm sure that you're aware that two of your own empirically based Department of Justice studies take issue with mandatory minimum terms for crimes of illegal drug distribution. The commentary prepared for this bill notes from a 2005 study, quote, "There is some indication that minimum sentences are not an effective sentencing tool. That is, they constrain judicial discretion without offering any increased crime prevention benefits." The other study from 2002 noted that the lack of deterrent effect flows again from the barring of judicial discretion. Prosecutors and police are then forced to exercise this discretion, often choosing not to charge people with offenses that would automatically lead to a prison term. Additionally, juries may choose to acquit individuals who face an automatic prison term when it seems excessive and unjust. But as I said at the outset, this morning I'd like to look at the specifics of Bill C-15 and its internal contradictions. I want to offer some practical amendments at this stage in the process, practical amendments that I see as critical to having any kind of internal consistency and that will improve its internal logic. First, let me say in a positive vein that Section 8, a mandated report to Parliament within 2 years of implementation, is a sound development. I know of no credible empirical evidence that would suggest benefits which would counter the excessive costs, so there is some comfort in the possibility that this rather reckless experiment in sentencing reform will be relatively short-lived. The most significant contradiction in this bill is its relatively harsh treatment of cannabis production in contrast to its treatment of the trafficking or possession for the purpose of trafficking in heroin, cocaine, and cannabis. Section 5.3 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act is to be amended to provide for a minimum term of 1 year imprisonment for trafficking in heroin, cocaine, or cannabis, provided that the convicted person commits the offense as part of a criminal organization as defined by Section 4671 of the Code, uses violence in committing the offense, is carrying or threatening to use a weapon in committing the offense, or has served a term of imprisonment for a designated substance offense, as you know, typically trafficking or importing illegal drugs. Somewhat surprisingly, and quite inconsistently, these same caveats are not applied to the offense of marijuana production, Section 3.1 sub B of Bill C-15. Granted, the minimum term of imprisonment is 6 months rather than 1 year, but the irony is that distributors of more dangerous drugs are to be treated less harshly than the producers of a less dangerous drug, cannabis, irrespective of the actual amounts to be distributed. I want to make 2 points. First, I would urge you to seriously consider amendment or removal of Section 1. Sub 1, sub A, sub 1, sub D of Bill C-15, the proposed imposition of a mandatory term of 1 year in prison, if the convicted drug distributor has served a term of imprisonment for illegal drug distribution at any point during the previous 10 years. Consider, for example, the user-dealer with addiction and mental health problems, convicted of selling a small amount of crack cocaine to his friends and associates, and having previously served a short jail sentence for this crime. Is this the kind of person that we want to lock up for a minimum of 1 year? It seems quite clear that if you leave this section as it is, you will fill our jails with hundreds of individuals who might be better served by a range of treatment modalities than by a mandated term of imprisonment. At the least, you might specify a minimum term of prior imprisonment, perhaps 1 year, as a precondition, though I think elimination of the section would be a much better strategy. Now, the other caveats that you've put in place, the existence of an organized criminal network, the use of violence, and the presence of weapons, all speak to conduct that is considerably more egregious. The bill's most glaring inconsistency is its much harsher treatment of the production of cannabis. As noted above, Section 3, sub 1, sub B of Bill C-15 will impose a minimum term of imprisonment of 6 months on any grower of 6 plants or more, irrespective of the issues of violence, weaponry, or the presence of criminal networks. It scarcely needs to be said that marijuana growers are not uniformly violent. Indeed, studies to date indicate that the industry is far from hierarchical and accordingly is replete with a variety of very unrelated grow operations. The majority of growers do not use violence, do not carry weapons, and are not part of any criminal organization as defined by Section 467.1 sub 1 of the Criminal Code. In these circumstances, Bill C-15 will have the unfortunate consequence of annually jailing thousands of Canadians who do not threaten our social fabric any more than those who produce in a regulated framework drugs such as tobacco and alcohol. Indeed, if morbidity is our benchmark, if we were actually considering science, it might be fairly said that the producers of alcohol and tobacco are imposing much greater harms upon our communities, even when rates of use are taken into account. I strongly suggest that the caveats applied to the distribution of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana also be applied to the production of cannabis, to the production of marijuana, prior to the imposition of a mandatory term of imprisonment. Put differently, the bill does not make a distinction between the cultivation of marijuana and some of the egregious kinds of conduct that some marijuana growers engage in. The creation of a public safety hazard through theft of electricity, the exposure of children to toxic residues, the presence of firearms in a grow operation, and the setting of potentially lethal traps in and around the grow operation. While it might make sense to denounce these kinds of conduct as part of this bill, it is grossly disproportionate to denounce all forms of marijuana cultivation with minimum terms of imprisonment. The same points can, of course, be made with respect to the distribution of cannabis. But herein lies the irony. The bill will treat producers of cannabis more harshly than distributors of cannabis, irrespective of the amounts in question in each circumstance. And that's an inconsistency that seems virtually impossible to justify. Finally, let's consider the cost of mandatory minimum terms of imprisonment under Bill C-15. I will focus on marijuana cultivation, though marijuana growers will certainly not be the only targets of the taxpayer dollars that will be required to fund passage of this new law, or to fund the reality of this new law. Fortunately, however, we have good data on this point. An RCMP study in 2005 canvassed all found cases of marijuana cultivation in British Columbia from 1997 to 2003 and noted that there were 14,483 such cases in the province in that 7-year period, resulting in approximately 3,500 convictions and a little more than 60 individuals going to jail each year for an average of 5 months. The new legislation will dictate 6 months in jail for an additional 3,000 British Columbians, or put differently, the imprisonment of a further 500 marijuana growers in British Columbia each year. The cost of this imprisonment will be approximately $57,000 per year for each provincial prisoner, a total of almost $30 million annually for marijuana cultivators alone. This change will mean that marijuana growers, marijuana producers, will make up approximately 20% of all provincial prisoners, in contrast to the current level of much less than 5%. Again, I would return to the point I made earlier. If marijuana growers or traffickers in heroin, cocaine, and other illegal drugs are engaging in violent and socially disruptive business practices, there is merit in a clear and unequivocal denunciation of this conduct. Unfortunately, this is not what Bill C-15 is providing, at least without a number of key amendments. I thank you for your time this morning, and I urge you to seriously consider making these amendments.
And thank you very much, Dr. Boyd. Again, I'll ask you, if you could, to provide us with the reference to the RCMP study in particular that you cited. And we will turn now to questions from senators. Colleagues, because we are on a teleconference, I'll just remind you all not to start speaking until you're sure your mic is on, because otherwise our poor witnesses won't be able to hear you. We have on the list Senators Wallace, Campbell, and Banks so far. Senator Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentations, gentlemen.